So here's one I wanted to go over. Rather than finding the clip, because Anna's going to actually have some good information after. But this kind of caught my attention, and I wanted to go over, because Anna's going to cover different pieces of this than what I thought about when I saw this. So we're going to go over we're going to go over the clip. We're going to go over what I think about what the guy talks about and my thoughts on that, and then we're going to go over Anna's information, which is way better than what I would have thought to go over. But anyways, here we go.
Fox News had some clown on to tell Americans suffering with severe economic anxiety that they've got nothing to worry about. In fact, if they feel that they're poor, if they're actually broke or living in debt, have no fear, you're actually a lot more wealthy than you know. Let's watch.
We are far more successful than European nations, and I think the writers at the New York Times and elsewhere, they don't realize that, or they try to trick people into believing it's not true.
We're also the kindest, most charitable state. We like to rip on ourselves all the time, but we give more money than many countries' GDP.
Okay, so that's the thing that I wanted to examine, right? So this idea that we give more than other countries' GDP. Well, so what they don't talk about here is, oh wait, I'm sorry. He says something about averages. So let's actually finish out the clip.
Absolutely. An average American gives 7 times as much as the average European. Now, the European will say, hey, you know, we pay a lot in taxes, so that's don't give charity. Well, yeah, that's the problem. When you give charity, you give to your local community. You build bonds with your neighbors and your church and and local. But you can't do that when government elbows out charity.
And the thing is, it's not just the rich; it's the working class give the same percentage as the upper class. Big salute to our country.
Okay, so before Anna goes into her stuff, because her stuff is really, really good, and I think it refutes this point better than what I'm going to bring up. But I wanted to bring up the things that I thought about when I heard all this. Okay, so 3 major things, right? So 1, the average American gives 7 times more than the average European. Okay, so the problem is do they mean the average American charitable contribution, or do they mean the average American and the amount that individual, or the amount that individual gives, right? So I haven't looked into the data, so this made me curious. Browsers. Oh, no, I'm in one. So I wanted to look up, because my thought was the problem. One of the things that bugs me is when they use average when they should be using median. So average American charitable. Here we go. Okay, so the average. How much does the average person donate to charity? Is $4,000 a year. Oops, I did not mean to do that. How do we go back? Versus the average American donation amount. General charity donation. So the average annual charity donation for Americans in 2020 is $737. Misleading. Let's look at why this. Okay, actually, yeah. Let's look at why those numbers are misleading. High net worth families donated. Okay, so here's why I took issue with what he was saying, right? So this is the average amount donated. High net worth families donate on average $30,000, which is going to greatly skew that $5,000 number. Among the rest of the general population, the figure was only okay. So this is more accurate information, right? Because that's 7. So and then the average online donation $177. Nonprofit episodes $1. Many Americans don't count the monetary value of goods they donate to. Okay, and so here's another thing, right? So one of the things that isn't talked about in these calculations is, and then there's also things that don't get like dollar amounts. So literally just like donating your time to charities. But then he was like, "Oh, we give 7 times more than the average European," and they'll say that they pay more for taxes. Okay, so what's the difference here? So there's and this is another thing they won't discuss, right? So one of the major issues with charities, which Anand Giridharadas talks about in his book. What is the name of the book? Winners take all. That's the name of the book. So Anand talks about this in Winners Take All. The issue with charities is twofold. So if I'm a wealthy business owner and my business causes a societal problem, let's say child poverty, right? I don't pay my workers enough, therefore the families go hungry. I can then, for a portion of the profits that I get by owning the business, I can then spend some of that money creating a charity to address the problem that my company itself causes. And then not only do I not have to pay my workers well enough that they can feed their families, therefore causing the problem, but that I then get the added benefit of looking like a good Samaritan by giving away part of my hard-earned money to help with this problem that I cause, right? And that's basically the premise that he's talking about, right? And there are other major things. So and then part of the problem, the other part of this issue is that as a wealthy individual, I pick and shoot, because I give to charitable foundations, and because that's where the majority of their money comes from is wealthy individuals, I pick and choose which societal ills are worthy of the effort to resolve, right? And that's just based on who I choose to donate to, not even considering that I can found the charities in the first place, right? So this allows people in the upper echelons of said society to decide who gets help for what problem, to the tune of whatever dollar amount they think makes sense, and then this and the other part of the problem, and it actually has nothing to do with donations themselves, but has to do with the issue that so if I make the charitable foundation, I can then put my brother in charge of the charitable foundation. He gets paid a salary which I determined because I created the charity. So he gets a portion of the money that I donate to the charity, which I get to write off as on taxes. It's this disgusting system that on the surface, yes, charities are good, and I'm not saying that we don't want charities and that people who give to charities are bad. The problem is that it's one of many systems. One of many systems that can be used to manipulate things in favor of people, in favor of the wealthiest individuals in their society, right? So again, the aside from the corruption aspect of it, I create a problem. I then create the solution to the problem, and so I get all the benefits, right? I don't have to practice business in an ethical way that doesn't create the problem in the first place. I then get the social credit for solving the problem, and I get to choose which problems do and don't get solved, right? So that's that thing. So then the other part of that was he was saying, oh well, these are the kinds of charities that when you have to pay money in taxes, you don't give to charities. Well, no, those aren't mutually exclusive, right? I pay taxes and I give to charities, right? You don't pick one or the other, which is I hate. That's the line of thinking with so many of these things. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can do more than one. We can do two things and three. We can do more than one thing, right? Secondly, the additional amount of money that you pay in taxes, what programs does that fund? Which, by the way, if it's a government program, that means you, as an average citizen, get to choose what your society then looks to solve, or what society ills your society solves, right? So, if it's all about charity, the wealthy people who create the foundations and give the money get to choose. If it's done through taxes, voters get to choose, right? Because you choose your representatives in the government. Those people are supposed to enact your will within these frameworks, which that's how these things are decided, right? Is the individuals, the representatives are okay, well, we want to fund these programs with this money. So and then on top of that, because they're government programs, right? Then it's not subject to an individual's whims as to how much, but then it's on. Then it's about getting budgets, right? So how do they get budgets? Well, typically someone runs the numbers and says, this is how much it's going to cost to enact this thing, right? And so when we're talking about solving problems, what you do is you then go to data, have someone crunch numbers and go, okay, according to this data, which this government agency collects, and according to math, right, which we can all agree math is not biased, according to the math, this is how much it costs to solve the problem, right? So you're taking care of a societal ill as a society, choosing which problems get addressed by by choosing which representatives represent you, right? So everything he just said on its face is incorrect, right? On top of the fact that the average, what is the median American charitable donation? Okay, so here is the difference I was talking about, right? So that average number was skewed by some things, right? But the median, this is the number that I was interested in. So the median takes into account how much someone at the higher end and the lower end give, right? So if you have 10 pieces of information ranging from 1 to 10, and you're trying to find the average, and you literally have 1 through 10, the average is 5, right? But if you have 10 pieces of information and 9 of them are 1, or I'm sorry, if you have, I might have to do the math on this, but like there's a way in which you can have more 1s and fewer 10s and still get an average of 5, right? Whereas if you take the median of that same data and you have more 1s than you do 10s, the median ends up being closer to 1 than it does 5 because of the weight that those apply, right? So anyways, I'm explaining this terribly, but there's a major difference between averages and medians. So when someone talks about averages, be very careful about that presentation information, because averages can be heavily skewed by the high ends and the low ends to make a number look very, very different than if you take the median, right? So this is why I was concerned when he brought up averages. What's the median? Well, the median is 850, which means that this is heavily skewed by the people at the high end of donations, right? The very, very wealthy giving huge amounts of money. And the issue with this is, why is that a point of concern? Well, for me, because I know these bits of information, why do very, very wealthy people give to charities? Is it out of the kindness of their hearts? No, it's because they get tax write-offs on it. It's literally about how much money can I give to a charity so I don't have to pay that money to the government, and then I actually save additional money because it's a tax write-off. Therefore, it's not calculated as part of my income. Therefore, I pay a lower tax rate because I made less money. So that's why this is super important, right? So the minute he said average charitable donation, I immediately became skeptical, because you wouldn't talk about the average charitable donation knowing that the majority of charitable donations are made by very wealthy people, and those very wealthy people give a lot of money. It's going to skew the numbers heavily. So this is a better representation of what the average American gives, which that's not bad, right? Considering most Americans live off of very, very low wages. What was the median American income? Yeah, the median American income was like barely over $30,000. So like, that's surprising that the median donation, charitable donation, is $850. Anyways, so back to the clip though, because Anna is going to blow him out of the water with some.
Big salute to our country. And you know what? Finally, someone is holding that socialist rag, the New York Times, accountable for their socialist reporting.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what? The New York Times, the New York Times, they're too friendly to the worker.
Yeah.
Come on. I mean, look, I have a bunch of data to rebut a lot of the garbage that was said there. But John.
Yeah,
Okay, so John, as much as I love John doesn't go into the data, which is the part that I care about here. So we're just going to skip ahead.
Fruitful country, right? Well, it turns out that between 1995 and 2013, workers' share of national income in the United States dropped by 8 percentage points, a steeper decline that in any other nation except for a steeper decline than in any other country except South Korea and Poland. In fact, if you take a look at this graph, because we're going to compare the United States and the European Union.
Okay, so what this graph is this is the amount of income. I'm sorry, the income share. How do I explain this? This is basically like how much of the GDP do these two different groups of the population receive, right? So if you look at the chart from the 1980s to I think this makes it like 2018 on the chart. The bottom 50% of and this is the U.S., right? This chart is the U.S. So the bottom 50% had their share of the national income drop from basically 21% to 13%. The top 1% had their share increase from 11 to 20, right? So a tiny report, like this is a tiny, the tiny percent, like this is such a tiny number of individuals versus like this is a massive number of people, right? So just like this alone is disgusting.
So the top 1% versus bottom 50% national income shares in the US, we'll get to Europe in the next graph, but if you just take a look at this, you'll see what happened to wealth in this country going back to the 1980s, right? So you see a massive increase in the amount of wealth accumulated by the top 1%, and then the bottom 50%, you see that wealth consistently drop.
Okay, so since we're looking at this information, what happened between the 1980s and 2000? Well, really 1995 is when it flipped, right? But what happened within this time frame? Deregulation of Wall Street. Deregulation of Wall Street. Let's try and say that again. Deregulation of banks. The gutting of antitrust. I don't want to say the gutting of antitrust laws because it wasn't laws themselves, but like the lack of enforcement of antitrust laws, and the inability with legislation to keep up with technology, right? So this is basically like Reagan's policies, Clinton's policies, Bush's policies, like all of those presidents have caused this, right? And I shouldn't say just their policies, but their agendas, because that's also what Congress has pushed, right? So like the removal of Glass-Steagall, which has allowed commercial banks and investment banks to basically do the same thing. What's the Communications Act? I forget the one that Clinton implemented, but the one that we now have 8 companies that control all the news media across the globe. 8. That means there are 8 CEOs and 8 boards of directors that get to determine what they think everyone in the world should know as far as news goes and the information on those news. No, that doesn't seem like a point of concern to anybody. So yeah, this is what our American politics has given us, right?
Now, I'm sure that this trend will be far more pronounced in the European Union, especially because the Fox News guest said that we have a far better system here. So let's take a look at European countries and how that. Oh wow, that's interesting.
Look. We're a joke. Our country is a joke in comparison. Look at that. Look at this. Look at this. Yes, the bottom 50% have a smaller share of the income, but this is like barely moved, especially in comparison. This is mind-blowing. We live in the greatest country on earth. Are you kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me?
Oh,
different.
A little different. A little different. You don't see that X right? You see like, two parallel lines and, okay, well, maybe.
Yeah, it's not that there's been no motion. There is some motion, but it is not an X.
In fact, you see that the bottom 50%, you see a little bit of an increase for the top 1% in Western Europe. But overall, there's some consistency there that would be kind of nice.
Yes.
Okay, so with that said, let's look at poverty rates in OECD countries as of 2019. This was the latest data that was released by the OECD, February of this year to be exact. And here's what they found. In terms of the countries with the highest poverty, you're looking at the top 5. Costa Rica comes in at number 1 with 19.9% of its population living in poverty. Hungary is next with 17.9%. And then, oh wow, would you look at that? The United States comes in at 3rd place with 17.8% of the US population living in poverty.
Okay, so one thing to keep in mind is these are OECD countries, which is basically like the first world or modern industrialized nations, right? That's what the OECD basically stipulates. So this doesn't take into account like every country, but we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to every country, right? If we're the greatest country on earth, we should probably be comparing ourselves to the other, really high status countries, right? Here we
Wonderful. But when we compare it to European countries, what's the difference? Oh, So let's take a look at Sweden, just 8.9%, France, 8.5%, Norway, 8.4%, Netherlands, 8.3%, Belgium, 8.2%. Again, just a reminder, friendly reminder.
Double. More than double. All 5 of those countries. And that's not every European country, right? But those are the ones that we're talking, like when leftists talk about, I shouldn't say leftists. When SOCDEMs, which are the majority of socialists, that's what they're talking about. Those systems. Denmark, oh my God. Denmark, Norway, Sweden. Those are the countries they're talking about emulating, right? And I've covered this before. What were their billionaires per capita? They're higher than what we have, right? So these are countries who have a greater number of very wealthy people per person in the country. They have drastically lower poverty rates. They have better life expectancies. They have happier populations. People who are more satisfied with their lives, and by their lives, that includes their jobs, right? But we live in the greatest country on earth, and any government program, anytime, what is Reagan's thing? The worst thing you could hear is, "I'm from the government. I'm here to help." What more do you need to understand that they are lying to you? And by the way, that Fox is particularly in that direction, but you hear the same things from CNN, from MSNBC, all of them. They all talk about how great this country is. By what metric? The size of our military is the only thing we really exceed anyone else in. And because of that, if you poll on a global level, what is the greatest threat to global peace? What do most countries say? Most people in most countries say America, the United States, is widely considered the greatest threat to global peace. Are we sure we're the greatest country on earth? Are we sure? Or is that just the people at the very, very top of the system telling you that it's amazing up here? Well, yeah, we know it's amazing up there. So we're asking you to send some of that down. So yeah, there's more of this. I'll put a link to this clip in the description. It's a really good clip. I don't want to undersell what John says here. It just wasn't what I wanted to discuss. John makes some good points, and then Anna goes on to grill this guy some more. It's really good. I highly recommend you watch. So that's going to be it for me today. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time because I have to go to work super early tomorrow. So I apologize that this is not my normal routine. hopefully I don't have to be doing too much of that next week. Also, quick announcement. Should probably be doing this in one of my gaming videos, but with the release of Endwalker coming up soon, that's going to be the focus of my content, because I cannot wait for this expansion pack to release. I am looking into streaming on multiple platforms. I will be paying for some software so that I can multi-stream. So if you're subscribed to the channel, keep a lookout in descriptions below. I'm going to start linking a Twitch channel and a Facebook channel. And I'm also looking to work with my brother on a combined channel. So keep an eye out for that. And you'll actually see my gaming material move there. And then this is going to be like my political channel. So just a heads up. There'll be links, and I'll make an announcement. But yeah, anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. If I can remember how to stop recording. There it is.